One moment I was stepping off the back porch, the next I was on the ground, my right ankle twisted underneath me at an angle that didn't make sense. And there was a sound, a crack, low and dull, that I felt in my teeth before I felt it in my leg. I didn't scream. That surprised me later. I just lay there in the wet grass, looking up at the gray October sky, thinking, this is how it happens. This is how it always happens to women like me. One ordinary morning, one misstep. My name is Loretta. I'm 67 years old. I taught middle school science for 31 years, raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband passed, and I have never once asked my daughter for anything she didn't offer first. I want you to remember that. The grass was cold. It had rained the night before, and the yard still held that smell. Wet earth, decaying leaves, the last of the season. I tried to push myself up, and the pain shot from my ankle straight up through my hip, and I stopped. Just stopped. Laid my cheek against the ground and breathed. My phone was inside. On the kitchen counter, right next to the coffee maker, exactly where I always leave it. I had come outside to check on the bird feeder. That's all. I'd been doing it every morning for 12 years. I don't know how long I was out there before the neighbor's dog started barking. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe longer. The cold had gotten into my fingers by then, and I'd stopped trying to move. It was my neighbor, a retired postal worker named Abe, who walks his beagle every morning at 7. Who found me. He didn't panic, bless him. He just crouched down, put his hand on my shoulder, and said, "I've got you, Loretta. Don't move." He called 911 from his own phone. He stayed with me until the ambulance came. He locked my back door with my spare key and slipped it into my coat pocket before they loaded me onto the stretcher. In all the chaos that followed, nobody thought to ask whether someone had called my daughter. The EMTs asked for an emergency contact. I gave them her name, her number. I told them she lived 40 minutes away, in a subdivision in Franklin, in a house with a 3-car garage and a hot tub on the deck, and a doorbell camera that sends alerts to her phone every time a squirrel crosses the front walk. Her name is Bridget. She's 39. She works in marketing, which I've never entirely understood, and her husband's name is Corey, and they have a golden retriever named Biscuit, who has his own Instagram account. I tell you these things not to be cruel, only to show you that my daughter is not a woman who misses notifications. They took me to Vanderbilt, the orthopedic surgeon. A quiet man named Dr. Osi, who had kind eyes and moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who has repaired 1,000 broken things, told me I had a fracture at the distal fibula and a secondary stress fracture that suggested my bone density wasn't where it should be. He said I'd need surgery. He said he'd seen worse. He said it in a way that was meant to be comforting, and I appreciated the effort. Before they wheeled me into pre-op, I asked the nurse if they'd reached my daughter. She checked the notes. "We've called 3 times, she said. Left 2 voicemails. "She's probably busy," I said. I believed that when I said it. I want you to know that. I still believed in her then. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia pulled me under was the overhead light, round and white and very bright, and thinking that I hoped Abe had remembered to refill the bird feeder before he left. I woke up in a recovery room with a throbbing leg and a mouth that tasted like copper, and the first thing I did was ask again. The nurse looked at her clipboard. "We've made 9 attempts to reach your emergency contact," she said. "No answer. No callback. 9. I nodded. I looked at the ceiling. I said, "Okay." My roommate in the hospital, a woman named Dolores who'd had knee replacement surgery and who had approximately 400 opinions about everything, told me not to take it personally. "Kids today," she said, shaking her head. "My son didn't visit until the 3rd day, and he only lives 6 blocks away." I smiled at her. I didn't say anything. But I started counting. Not out of spite, not then. Just because numbers have always made sense to me in a way that feelings sometimes don't. Science teacher habit. By the time my daughter finally walked through that hospital room door, the hospital had attempted to contact her 23 times. 23 calls, over the course of 31 hours. She came in on the 2nd afternoon, still wearing her work clothes, a blazer and heeled boots, with her hair done and her makeup fresh and a small paper bag from a bakery hanging from her wrist. She set the bag on the bedside table and leaned down and kissed my forehead and said, "Mom, you look terrible. Are you okay?" "I had surgery," I said. I know. She sat down and crossed her legs and started looking around the room with the expression she gets when she's somewhere she doesn't want to be. I came as fast as I could. I didn't ask where she'd been. Not then. I thanked her for coming. I ate one of the cookies from the bakery bag because I hadn't eaten since the morning before, and I was starving. And Dolores gave me a look from behind her crossword puzzle that said everything I wasn't saying. My daughter stayed for 19 minutes. She left before dinner. She said she had to get home because Biscuit hadn't been walked. She texted me that night. "Hope you sleep well. Let me know if you need anything." With an exclamation point. I lay in that hospital bed for 3 more days. My neighbor Abe came every afternoon, brought me a paperback mystery and a thermos of real coffee, and sat with me for an hour each time, talking about nothing in particular. The weather, the birds, a podcast he'd been listening to about the history of the interstate highway system. Normal things, good things. My daughter came once more. Day 4. She brought flowers this time, a big grocery store bouquet still in the plastic sleeve, and she spent most of the visit on her phone, and when she left she hugged me a little too quickly and said, "The doctors say you're doing great, so. She drove 40 minutes home, and I listened to the sound of her heels clicking down the hospital corridor until I couldn't hear them anymore. I was discharged on a Thursday. Physical therapy twice a week. No driving for 6 weeks. Crutches for the first 2, then a walking boot. The discharge nurse went through the instructions carefully, and then she asked if I had someone at home to help me. I said yes. I called my daughter that afternoon and asked if she could stay with me for the first week. Just the first week. I'd done the math. I couldn't get up the porch steps without help. Couldn't stand long enough to cook. Couldn't drive myself to appointments. She said she'd have to check with Corey. She called back 2 hours later. She said she was so sorry. But Corey had a work thing, and she had a big campaign launching, and they just couldn't make it work right now. But she'd call around. She knew a home health agency. She'd look into it. She said, "You'll be fine, Mom. You're tough." I have been tough my entire life. I was tough when my husband got sick, and I kept teaching and kept the house and kept showing up for my kids while also watching the person I loved, most in the world, get smaller and quieter and then disappear. I was tough when I went back to work the week after the funeral because we needed the insurance. I was tough for 30 years, and I never once asked either of my children to acknowledge what that cost me. But I was standing in my kitchen on a broken leg with a boot on my foot and a crutch under my arm. And I needed someone to help me get up the stairs, and my daughter was telling me I was tough. I said, "You're right. I'll figure it out." And I hung up. Abe helped me get settled. His wife, a gentle woman named Phyllis who volunteers at the library, came over that first evening and made me a pot of soup and labeled everything in the refrigerator with masking tape and a marker, so I wouldn't have to think too hard. She put the physical therapy schedule on the refrigerator with a magnet. She showed me how to arrange the crutches so I could reach them from the bed. My daughter texted, "How's the first night home going?" I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "Fine, thanks." And I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark and listened to the quiet house and thought about numbers. 23 calls, 31 hours, 90 minutes. 1 week. I thought about what those numbers meant, added up over time. I started doing the math on the whole thing then. Not just the hospital. All of it. The holidays I'd driven to Franklin because it was easier. The calls I'd made weekly that were returned maybe once a month. The birthday dinner she'd rescheduled twice and then celebrated eventually at a restaurant of her choosing, talking mostly about a vacation she and Corey were planning. The health scare I'd had 2 years ago. Just a shadow on an X-ray, nothing in the end, but terrifying for 2 weeks. That she'd responded to by sending me a link to an article about mindfulness. I'd explained all of this away year by year, in the way that mothers explain things away. She's busy. She's stressed. She has her own life. You raise them to have their own lives. But lying there in the dark with my leg throbbing and the empty house creaking around me, I thought, there's a difference between having your own life and being unavailable when your mother is in surgery. 23 calls. I slept badly. I woke up at 3 in the morning and lay there listening to nothing. And I thought about my house. My house. The one my husband and I bought 32 years ago, when the neighborhood was still considered a little rough, and the kitchen was avocado green, and we thought we were getting away with something. The one I'd repainted and replumbed and re-roofed, slowly over 3 decades, until it became the kind of house people stopped to admire. The one my children had grown up in. The one my daughter had always assumed, without ever saying so directly, would be hers. She'd mentioned it in ways that weren't quite mentions, asking about the property values in my neighborhood, commenting once on how much the Taylors down the street had gotten for their place, saying in a vague future tense way that back bedroom would be perfect for a nursery someday, possessive without possession. I'd never corrected her. I just nodded and changed the subject the way I always did. But at 3 in the morning, with my leg aching and Abe and Phyllis's porch light the only light visible through my bedroom window, I thought, why? I called an attorney the following week. Her name was Patricia. Actually, no, let me start that sentence over. I called an attorney the following week. Her name was Miss Okafor. She was direct and unhurried, and she didn't ask me why I was doing what I was doing, which I respected. I told her I wanted to update my estate plan. I told her I'd had a health event and wanted to make sure my affairs were in order. I did not tell her about the 23 phone calls. That was mine to keep. She walked me through everything clearly. The will, the beneficiary designations on my retirement accounts, my life insurance, my small investment portfolio that I'd built slowly and carefully over 30 years of teacher's salary saving. The house. I made changes. I left my daughter something. I'm not a vindictive person, and I want that to be clear. But the bulk of what I'd spent a lifetime building, the house, the accounts, the things that had real weight, I redirected to my son, who lives out of state, and whom I see twice a year, but who, when he heard about the fall, booked a flight that same night and showed up at my door with a duffel bag and groceries and spent 4 days sleeping on my couch and driving me to physical therapy and making breakfast every morning before I was even up. He hadn't asked about the house, not once, not ever. I also set up a small educational trust for Abe and Phyllis's granddaughter, who is 10 years old and wants to be a marine biologist, and who comes over sometimes on Saturday mornings to look at the birds with me. That one made me feel the best of anything I'd done in a long time. I didn't tell my daughter any of this. I went home from Ms. Okafor's office, made myself a cup of tea, and sat on the back porch in my walking boot with a blanket over my lap and watched the birds at the feeder for a long time. My daughter called that evening. She asked how PT was going. She said she'd been meaning to come by, but things had been hectic. She said the campaign launched and it went really well, and Biscuit had gotten into the trash again, and they were thinking about redoing the deck. I said, "That sounds nice." She said, "You should come see it when it's done." I said, "I'd like that," and I meant it, actually. In the specific, limited way that I mean things now, I would like to see the deck. I would like to have a relationship with my daughter that does not require me to pretend the last 6 weeks didn't happen. I would like a lot of things that I've stopped expecting, but I've stopped expecting them quietly, and that's different from before. Before, I was quiet because I was hoping. Now I'm quiet because I've already acted. My son called me the following Sunday. We talked for an hour about nothing much. His kids, my PT progress, a book we'd both read, whether I was getting enough protein. At the end of the call, he said, "I'm sorry I can't be closer, Mom." I said, "You came when it mattered." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Of course I did. Of course." That's the thing about the people who show up. They don't understand why you'd thank them for it because it doesn't occur to them that there was another option. My daughter found out about the estate changes 4 months later. Not from me. I don't know exactly how, though I suspect she asked my son something sideways, and he, who is constitutionally incapable of lying, said more than he meant to. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the backyard pulling up the last of the dead marigolds when my phone rang, and I could tell from the first syllable that she knew. "Mom," she said, "is it true you changed your will?" "Yes," I said. I pulled a marigold out by the root, shook the dirt off, set it in the pile. "Without telling me." "It's my will," I said. There was a silence that had a texture to it, not quite anger yet, not quite hurt, something in between. Something that was looking for a way to become whichever one would be most effective. "I don't understand," she said. I thought. "I know what you thought," I said. Another silence. "Is this because of the hospital?" she asked, and her voice had shifted now, quieter, like she was testing the ground. I set down my trowel, sat back on my heels. The sun was low, and the yard smelled like cold dirt and dried grass, and the last of autumn. "The hospital called you 23 times," I said. "Over 31 hours. I heard her breath catch. "I was in surgery," I said, "and I woke up in recovery and asked if anyone had reached you, and the nurse checked her notes and told me they'd made 9 attempts, and I said, okay, because what else do you say?" I said, okay, and I looked at the ceiling, and I waited, and I kept waiting. And you came the next afternoon in your work clothes with a bakery bag, and you stayed 90 minutes, and you left because the dog needed walking." She didn't say anything. I kept talking, not because I was angry. I'd been through the anger already, alone, in the dark, in those first weeks, but because I wanted her to hear it said, plainly, the way I'd say a fact to a classroom of 12-year-olds. "Here is what happened. Here are the numbers. Here is what they mean." "I needed help when I came home," I said. "I asked you for 1 week. You said you'd look into a home health agency. Your neighbor came over and made me soup. Mom, I'm not finished." She stopped. "I spent 31 years teaching. I taught kids who had nothing, and I bought them notebooks out of my own pocket, and I drove them to after-school programs, and I wrote them college recommendations at midnight. I did that because they needed it, and it was right to do. I never kept a ledger. But when I needed someone, I wanted it to be you. And it wasn't." The sun dropped behind the fence. The yard went gray. "I love you," I said. "That's not the question. But I spent my whole life being tough because I thought that's what a good mother does. You carry it yourself. You don't burden the kids. You figure it out. And I figured it out. I always figure it out. But I'm 67 years old and I fell in my backyard. And I was alone in a hospital for 31 hours. And I've been thinking ever since about what I actually want the rest of my life to look like. And what does that look like?" Her voice was very small. "Honest," I said. "It looks honest. I changed the will because the will should reflect what's real, not what I was hoping for." She cried then. Not loudly. My daughter doesn't do anything loudly. But I could hear it in her breathing, that controlled, careful falling apart that she's done since she was small. And here is the part I want you to hear clearly, because I've told parts of this story to a few people. And they always wait for the part where I soften it, where I say, "But we've talked since," or "She's really been trying," or "I think she understands now." I don't know yet. I genuinely don't know. We talked for another hour that evening. She asked questions I answered honestly. She said things that sounded like the beginning of understanding, and things that sounded like negotiation, and I couldn't always tell which was which. Before we hung up, she said she was sorry. And I said I believed her. But belief isn't the same as trust. And trust isn't the same as what I do with my house. I've been thinking lately about what I would tell a woman in my position if she came to me and described these past 6 months. I've been thinking about it because I've gotten messages. Since I started talking about this carefully to people in my life. From women who know exactly what I'm talking about. Women who have spent decades absorbing the ambient message that the loving thing is to minimize what you need, to take up less space, to not put anyone out, to be tough. I want to say to those women what I had to learn the hard way at 67 years old, lying on wet grass in October, looking up at a gray sky. Your needs are not an imposition. Your time is not unlimited, and the people who will show up, who will come on a red-eye flight with a duffel bag, who will walk a beagle past your yard every morning, and notice when you don't appear, those people deserve to know that you see them. I went to my first full physical therapy appointment without a crutch last week. My therapist, a young woman who is relentlessly cheerful in a way I've come to genuinely appreciate, said I was ahead of schedule. I told her I had things to get back to. She asked what things. I said, the birds, mostly. She laughed. She thought I was joking. I've got the feeder restocked now. I sit on the back porch in the mornings with my coffee, and I watch the chickadees and the juncos, and occasionally, when I've been lucky, a red-bellied woodpecker who visits the suet cage I hung last fall. Abe's granddaughter came over last Saturday with her field notebook, and we sat together for 2 hours, and she identified 11 species and wrote each one down in careful block letters. And when she left, she said, "Same time next week?" I said yes, my daughter texted yesterday. She asked if she could come for Thanksgiving this year. Bring Corey. Maybe talk. I said I would think about it, and I meant that too, in the exact way I said it. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to sit with my coffee and my birds and the honest knowledge of what the last year has taught me, and I'm going to make a decision that's real rather than one that's just hoping dressed up as a plan. That's all I'm promising myself now. Decisions that are real. Because here's what I know. You can love someone and still see them clearly. You can grieve what you wanted and still build something true with what you have. You can be a good mother without pretending that good mothering requires you to disappear. I kept the bird feeder. I updated the will. I let the right people in. And for the first time in as long as I can remember, I'm not waiting for anyone's permission to call that enough.